Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Creative Aging Special Interest Group Symposium. We're absolutely delighted to have 119 people registered for this morning's session, so welcome everybody. My name's Emily and I am the founder and chair of the Creative Aging Special Interest Group, and I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the SIG, a bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to pass over to Robin, who is going to just talk us through the lineup we have for you for this morning. So we launched our SIG in February last year and held our inaugural symposium in Liverpool last year at the BSG's conference. We've, over the last 18 months, accumulated over 100 international members. We've now got over 1,000 followers on Twitter. And as I say, we've got 119 people registered for the symposium this morning. So that's great news. Just have to say a quick thank you to Aging and Society and Policy Press, who support the BSG's special interest groups. Of the members that we have today, we have about a quarter who are already Creative Aging SIG members. So if you're not and you would like to be, don't worry, because we will send you an email after the session today with a link to our membership form. So please do sign up. It's free to join and it means that you'll receive regular updates on what's happening with the SIG. If you're a Twitter fan, please do tweet throughout our symposium and tag us. We are at BSG Creative SIG and also use the hashtag BSG2020. You have my email address on there, so if you do want to follow up after the session, do that. But as I say, we will be emailing all delegates following the symposium this morning. Just some brief housekeeping before we start. Because of the large numbers we have this morning, we are unable to do any technical troubleshooting on an individual basis. But just a few notes on audio. You won't be able to speak apart from the presenters, so hopefully you can hear me and you'll be able to hear the other presenters clearly. If you do have any static or feedback, please try and move any smartphones or other electronic devices away from your computer or your phone. That can cause some feedback. And you can also check your microphone and speaker settings on the device that you're using. We do have a question box, so if you do have a question for one of the presenters as we're going through the sessions, please enter it in the question box and just make a note of the presenter's name so that behind the scenes we can collate all the questions. We will be saving questions for the panel discussion, which will take place after a brief comfort break. The session is being recorded and that will be available through the BSG after the session, and we'll also make the slides available. So don't worry, you don't need to take avid notes unless you want to, of course. Just in terms of timekeeping, the presentations will last between 10 and 15 minutes each. We'll then take a comfort break before the panel discussion, which will be around 10:30. So we hope you enjoy the symposium. Thank you again for coming, and I'll hand over to Robin, who's just going to introduce the presentations.
Thanks, Emily. So today we have some really fantastic presentations on the theme of creative and participatory methods for understanding what it means to age creatively. And then after our presentations, we're going to be having a panel discussion where you have the opportunity to ask your questions and also contextualizing what might happen within research and practice within creative aging in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd like to invite Emma Harding and Emily Brotherhood to start the session today with their presentation that focuses on creative approaches to person-centered care and support for people with rare dementias.
Thanks, Robin, and good morning, everybody. We're delighted to be here presenting this morning, and thank you so much to the BSG for continuing to adapt to make sure it could go ahead virtually. Thank you also to the organisers of this symposium, so including Emily, Robin, Kat and Karen, who are, as you can see, all working extremely hard behind the scenes, making sure everything runs as smoothly as possible. So my name is Emily Brotherhood, and I'm co-presenting today with my colleague Emma Harding. We're both research fellows and from the Dementia Research Centre, University College London. We're speaking today on some of the creative approaches of our research projects and the angles that they've taken and applied to person-centred care and support for people living with rare forms of dementia. So Karen, if I could kindly ask you to move on to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, and one after that. That's lovely, thank you. So first of all, I want to touch upon the theme of rare dementias and why it's important that we learn from this population. So it's estimated that up to 20% of people living with a dementia are living with a rarer form. And a rarer form means that the person is either diagnosed before the age of 65, so often within working age, and or their cognitive difficulties don't typically include memory problems as a predominant feature of their condition. So their symptoms may affect skills such as speaking or reading rather than problems with memory. And as you can see on the right of the slide, we've listed some of these rarer forms and their associated leading symptoms. A major challenge when researching how best to care and support these people living with rare dementias centres on the fact that we're not often able to call upon many of the tools and the strategies that we might typically use in dementia research to explore their experience. And that's regardless of whether these experiences are creative or not. Another factor to consider, and this is across all dementias, not just the rarer forms, is that we need to be thinking about ways that we can capture experiences that are robust to the sad fact that as the disease progresses, people lose the ability to communicate verbally via language. So while the art's a fantastic way to engage people living with dementia across all stages, we need to make sure that there are ways to explore their impact on people in later stages so that their value to these people aren't overlooked. Sadly, we may all be able to recall an experience where perhaps a relative or friend of someone living with a late stage dementia and the utterance that, they don't respond to me or to anything really. And while this type of reaction is understandable because we tend to rely on language as the primary method of communication in response to stimuli, however, it may not be the case and we may be overlooking these reactions that are taking place in people with dementia at later stages. So for the first part of this presentation, I'm going to be explaining how physical or biosignals could act as a proxy to explore individualised preference to music in people living with a dementia. So Karen, if I could kindly ask you to move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our projects involving biosignals came about in line with an exciting time for the arts and dementia research field. So this is including the World Health Organization launching their first report last year on evidence base for arts and health interventions. And in that report, there was a conclusion that centred around the recommendation for an increase in the prevalence of social prescription involving the arts. So evidence-based information about the value of music in people living with a dementia and any creative activity is always going to be difficult to gather due to a number of factors. But we wanted to try and establish ways that we could capture in the moment experiences that people living with dementia are having. So biosignals have been recognised in research as a relative marker for a change in a person's emotional and cognitive state. So this is some form of physical response to stimuli that might give way to how a person is feeling or appraising that stimuli. So some of these signals, such as heart rate, skin temperature, movement, and skin conductance, which is essentially how much we sweat on the surface of our skin, can be captured using devices called empaticas, which are shown here as a wristwatch, and they're very similar to Fitbits, but with a couple of more features. And these act as a discrete wearable while a person either listens to different music clips or engages in other creative activities, and this is just passively recording in the background. In addition, we're lucky at UCL to have an eye tracker, which can be positioned on a desk as a person listens to music through a computer. And this can work out relative changes in the size of a person's pupil as they listen to music. So in this specific project, which was around music and trying to capture these biosignals while someone was listening to music clips, what we're trying to do in that research is, which is taking place firstly with people living in the early stages of rare and typical forms of Alzheimer's disease, is to see if these biosignals fit the way that people verbally describe their musical experience. So specifically, how much does a person like a piece of music? And secondly, how well do they know it? So the ultimate aim is to tell or see if we can tell from a person's physical reaction if they A, know the piece and or B, they like it. If so, then this can have applications for individualizing music for people at later stages of both rare and typical dementias, who could perhaps no longer communicate these experiences verbally, but who very much still elicit that enjoyment and familiarity with particular pieces over others. So this is a longer term goal for this research and how we could incorporate sort of biosignals and physical responses into helping people with later stage dementia and increasing their accessibility to music activities. At this first stage, in this part of the research that we've conducted, we first needed to establish whether or not we can be confident that a physical reaction is an indicator for a particular musical experience, first in healthy older adults and with people living with dementia. So far, we've collected data from 20 people living with rare forms of Alzheimer's disease called posterior cortical atrophy, 20 people living with typical Alzheimer's disease, and 100 healthy age-matched volunteers. So analysis of this data is currently underway, and firstly we've started with the analysis in the healthy volunteers. So the preliminary results indicate that some of these biosignals are responding differently when a person is listening to a piece of music which is familiar compared to when a person listens to an unfamiliar piece of music. And this is found firstly in the healthy adults. So this is in line with research findings from researchers such as Maria Chait at University College London, who has conducted similar research looking at the same phenomenon in younger adults. And as our analysis progresses, we look forward to hopefully presenting some more results at a later date. I'm going to hand over now to Emma Harding, who's going to talk about a different approach to creative methods in research involving people living with rare dementias.
Thank you, Emily, and hopefully everybody can hear me. So yes, Emily's just described one angle of our work, which is about capturing the impact of creative activities on the lived experiences of people with different types of dementia. I'm now going to briefly introduce some of the work we've been doing to see if we can capture lived experience using creative activities or methods. So if I could have the next slide, please, Karen. So we know, as Emily touched on, that because of their more unusual symptom profiles, the experiences of people with rare dementias are often not well accounted for by the standardised kind of self-report measures that we have in place. So most of the dementia-specific questionnaires that we can use have an assumption that people will be mostly of older age and having mostly memory-led symptoms, which is not always the case for people with rarer dementias. So just to give you an example of a particular rare dementia that we sometimes call the visual variant of Alzheimer's disease. So the leading symptom is vision, problems with vision. This lady summed up her mother's experience when she said, "My mother remembers who I am and what she had for breakfast, but she tries to put her socks on over her shoes." So if we think about a standard questionnaire about dressing abilities, for example, it might be asking if someone forgets where their clothes are or what season they should be dressing for. And those sorts of questions really wouldn't capture this sort of an experience. So when the activity is actually disrupted by something other than memory, which is vision in this case. And there are other rarer dementias, as Emily mentioned, like the primary progressive aphasias, in which language is most affected. And you can imagine how that could make it very difficult for someone to participate in, say, a semi-structured interview, another method that we often use to try and access individual experience. So we want to try and develop measures that can capture different sorts of experiences and impacts. And one way that we're trying to work towards that is to tailor existing measures and think quite creatively about those. So on the left-hand side here, you can see what we're calling a DIY radial graph. And with this sort of measure, we're inviting participants to tell us the aspects of their experience they want measured at different time points. So they can self-select what's being measured based on what is kind of critical to them at that time in their life and individual circumstance and in their condition. So at one point that might be, one of those blanks could be relationship with friends and family, and at another time point that might be about minimising risk. So some creativity around existing measures. But we also need methods that don't rely solely on the skills typically drawn on by self-report measures, so those verbal or memory skills that we've touched on. We also need methods that allow us to represent experience in a different way, in ways that can capture the nuances and complexities of lived experience of rare dementias. So to try and do this, we're also developing a series of novel, creative and artistic approaches. We know the arts have been used for centuries to try and help explain and understand the world from different perspectives, and we want to try and apply this in our research with people with rarer dementias in particular. So one way we're exploring this is with research poetry, and another way is with a mark making activity, which you can see on the right hand side here, which is called Blue Roots. And in this activity, we're inviting participants to draw lines to describe their journeys, for example, from their first symptoms to their diagnosis, or from their diagnosis to describe their experience of support since then to the present day. And we hope these methods are going to offer new opportunities to capture some of those complexities. If I could have the next slide, please, Karen. I also wanted to briefly reflect on the impact of the current COVID-19 situation on our research and practice, because we also run the Rare Dementia Support Service for people with rarer dementias. So the impact study, the research project, was always set up for remote data collection, and that's because of the rarity of the conditions of the people we see. They're naturally spread across a vast geographical area, and we always wanted to be able to access as many people as possible. So we have most of our participants are taking part in online interviews or telephone interviews, questionnaires and surveys online, and we're also just adapting our creative activity protocols so that they can also be delivered online. Some of the elements of our support service that we've adapted, so our large meetings, which used to be held in London face-to-face, are now online webinars, much like this one. Which are a shorter time than we used to spend with people, but allocating half of that time to questions and answers that people can submit in advance, and then having half the time with sort of brief updates from other members, clinical experts and familiar faces from the research team. And we've so far seen similar numbers of people joining those webinars, which is really encouraging. So we think if we assume that more than one person is behind each laptop, and we think we are managing to reach more people than usual with that, which is great. We're also running some small online discussion groups for 10 to 12 people at a time around some specific themes. So some of those are information-led about sort of healthcare planning, and others are more experience-led around themes such as grief and loss. And we've seen a really keen interest in those groups. So the first pilot programme was delivered to 86 people, and we had over 100 sign-ups for the second round, which are due to start next week, which is great. And we've also been collating some arts and cultural resources, and I've just popped a link on the screen in case you want to have a look at those. So to try and encourage and help people to stay engaged with those kinds of meaningful activities from home, while we are all mostly at home at the moment. And if we could have the next slide, please, Karen. We're just going to sum up now with some concluding thoughts. I'll just hand back to Emily for that.
Sorry, just realised I'd muted myself. Okay, so just going to finish with these concluding thoughts, that the value of person-centred creative activities for people living with dementia are becoming increasingly recognised. So there's always a positive to take from that. So like the World Health Organization report that I mentioned before, in the increase in recommending social prescribing. There's also other fantastic campaigns such as Music for Dementia 2020, and of course lots of others which will be in the resource, as Emma mentioned earlier, that we've got for people during lockdown at the moment to be engaging with different activities, mainly online, but obviously in normal course of events which take place face to face. And People with rarer dementias, as we've both mentioned, have particular experiences which should be captured, and yet their specific disease-related difficulties can often act as a barrier to research and accessing support and different kinds of activities. So we need to be mindful about which approaches could be used to increase accessibility for people living with rare forms of dementia and those at a later stages. And we've covered just a few ideas of how creative approaches can really address those challenges.
And then just to finish, to add to that, we have definitely had some particular learning from the current ways we've had to adapt our research and practice in light of the COVID-19 situation. And a lot of that learning we intend to take forward with us into the longer term to ensure we are reaching as many people as possible in as many different locations and circumstances as possible as well. And we hope that that combination of using creative approaches and also adapting our delivery formats will really help us to overcome some of those main barriers to engagement with either research or support or activities, so that we can both deepen our understanding of the experience of rare dementias, but also to make sure that we're as wide reaching as possible in the support we provide to people affected. If we could have the final slide now, Karen. Thank you. Just wanted to say, to finish there and to say thank you to all of our generous participants and to acknowledge our funders and collaborators, to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. And if you'd like to follow us for some more updates on Twitter, then please do. And we look forward to your questions later on today. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma and Emily. That was really interesting. I'm gonna ask Jude if we can have her presentation now, which is on dance for older people, new approaches to understanding therapeutic benefits across domains. Thanks, Jude.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got lots of work to talk about, but I'll try and just give you a brief overview of a few different elements of that. So I'll just be talking about some collaborative work that I've been involved in, exploring how dance might provide a range of therapeutic effects for older people, and in particular those with age-related neurological conditions. So why dance in particular? Well, dance is really a multi-dimensional activity involving physical, cognitive and emotional processes, as well as music, rhythm and many other things. So I've listed here just some of the elements of dance that may contribute to beneficial effects for older people. And combined with the fact that it's a social and enjoyable activity, it really has the potential to provide a sustainable and effective approach to maintaining well-being in later life, as well as helping to manage the symptoms of health conditions. If we could have the next slide. So dance is increasingly popular among older adults and has been attracting a lot of interest from researchers as well as the mainstream media. And a range of physical and non-physical benefits of dance have been reported in older adults from various different dance styles as well, such as improvements in balance and posture, gait, functional mobility, as well as some effects on various aspects of cognition, mood and quality of life, so quite a broad range of potential benefits. And while there are quite a lot of studies in healthy older adults, there's also a large literature on dance for Parkinson's, as well as some studies in dementia and other age-related conditions. However, a strong evidence base is really still lacking in terms of understanding the mechanisms underlying the beneficial effects of dance for older people, and how to optimize these positive effects. Okay, next slide. So in a recent paper, my colleagues and I reviewed the literature on dance for people with Parkinson's and proposed that some of the motor and non-motor effects may relate to the use of internal representations of action within dance. Now, without sort of going into too much detail here, basically what I mean by this is the internal simulation of movement through observing other people's movement, imitating and also imagining movement. And these processes are known to activate sensory motor areas of the brain to facilitate movement, as well as being involved in social processes such as emotion recognition and communication. So there's evidence from younger dancers that motor simulation processes are widely used in dance, and that action observation and imagery can be enhanced through dance training. There's also evidence from other research that motor simulation can improve movement in older adults, as well as people with Parkinson's and stroke survivors. So we wanted to investigate whether older people and those with age-related neurological conditions can also engage in motor simulation in dance and potentially enhance these skills. Next. To explore this idea of motor simulation in dance, cognitive neuroscience researchers from the Beam Lab at the University of Manchester ran a pilot study in collaboration with English National Ballet and a local social enterprise called Equilibrium, who specialise in dance and arts. We worked with a small team, which included people with Parkinson's, dance artists and a physiotherapist, to design a short programme of dance classes, drawing on elements of English National Ballet's established Dance for Parkinson's model, as well as bringing in elements of classical Indian dance, which uses a lot of expressive and communicative facial and bodily movements, which we thought could be interesting in terms of motor simulation. So the classes incorporated observation and imitation of actions, as well as motor imagery, using exercises such as imagining yourself moving like a tree, or a particular animal or a bird, or painting a landscape, for example. And the exercises were based on themes and stories to keep people interested and motivated, and participants were also encouraged to contribute ideas to the themes and choreography. So we explored potential effects of the dance classes using both quantitative and qualitative measures to try and identify what might be useful to include in a larger trial. And following the trial, we held a dissemination workshop to share our findings with participants, dance artists, and researchers and healthcare professionals. And as part of this, we also had a photography exhibition with images captured during the dance classes. Okay, so on the next slide, I'll just give a quick overview of the pilot study. So we ran a 6-week trial of dance classes with 10 participants, both male and female, and they all had Parkinson's, and we conducted assessments in the lab before and after the 6 weeks, which explored effects on action observation using eye tracking, a similar method to what the previous presenters mentioned, to record eye movements when people were watching videos of dance, and collecting ratings of emotion and embodiment when people were watching those clips. We also used a measure of motor imagery, and we looked at self-reported difficulties with everyday actions. We also recorded movement during classes using wearable accelerometers, and participants completed a short mood rating questionnaire before and after each class. Following each class, we had coffee and cake time, which was extremely important, which provided an opportunity for participants to socialise with each other and also to share any feedback with the research team and the dance instructors. And after the final lab assessment, we also held a focus group to explore participants' experiences of the dance programme in more depth, and in particular, their experiences of motor simulation within dance. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to share some nice images here to give you an idea of what the dance classes look like. And on the next slide, just a few portraits of some of our participants that were taken as part of the photography project, which people really enjoyed doing. So on the following slide, I will just give a very brief snapshot of the findings. I don't have time to go into detail, but also given the small number of participants and the small scale of this pilot study, the results are just really to give us an idea of what might be interesting to look into in future research. So the recordings of movement in classes from the wearable accelerometers showed a pattern of reduced variability of movement over time. And although we're not entirely sure how to interpret this, it's something interesting that we'd like to pursue in the future. Participants rated their mood more positively on average after classes than before, and pre and post assessments in the lab suggested that participants noticed some improvement in their ability to perform everyday tasks. There was some change in eye movements and ratings of embodiment, whereby participants were asked how much they had a sense of feeling the dancer's movement when watching the clips of dance, which suggests possibly some influence on motor simulation, but we found no change on a motor imagery measure. Okay, and on the next slide, I just wanted to share a few quotes from participants, which I think really illustrates how useful qualitative data can be for revealing insights into the mechanisms of dance, especially in a small study like this. So one example is indicating that although on the lab measures we didn't find a change in motor imagery ability, participants, some participants at least, had been able to apply imagery skills from the dance classes to their everyday tasks. So that was particularly interesting to find. Okay, and the next slide. Following on from the pilot study, we then conducted a survey of dance practitioners working with older adults and people with neurological conditions to further explore which elements are used in dance programs and how they might be linked to outcomes. Although we asked about a broader range of elements, we were particularly interested in those that might promote motor simulation, such as imagery, visualization, mirroring, imitation. And I've just highlighted here how frequently some of the elements relating to motor simulation were reported to be used in classes, as well as some of the benefits that were commonly noticed in participants. And interestingly, this included things like increased creativity, self-awareness, and social skills, as well as the more obvious aspects of movement. Despite the fact that we co-designed this survey with dance artists, we unfortunately didn't manage to collect as many responses as we'd hoped for. But again, the qualitative data, I've just put some examples of quotes on there, really sort of provided some rich insights into the use of action observation and imagery within dance. So this will be really interesting to explore, and we're just in the process of analysing this data at the moment. So on the next slide, we had planned to apply for funding and to conduct some further research into motor simulation in dance, including looking at the effects of both classes and home-based practice. But then, of course, the pandemic came along. So in the meantime, as an alternative way to explore this further, I've just recently set up a new survey in collaboration with the Royal Academy of Dance, who provide dance programs for older people, as well as Dance for PD, who provide programs for people with Parkinson's. And this survey is aimed at participants themselves to try and capture information about the use of online or home-based dance resources, which can also include DVDs, while in-person classes are not currently possible, with questions exploring the type of resources used and how frequently, how participants engage with dance at home and what processes might be involved, advantages and disadvantages, perceived benefits and barriers to participation, as well as how these resources may be used in the future. And so we plan to share our findings from this survey directly with dance organisations and practitioners to facilitate the ongoing development of these resources, as well as to inform our own further research. So on the next slide, I've just put some maps up from these organisations showing that they have a huge number of locations around the world with classes and dance instructors. We've already had a fairly good international response. So I'm hoping that this will provide some really useful information. Okay, and so on the next slide, just to consider some future directions. So clearly the current situation presents obvious challenges, but also some opportunities to develop new platforms and new methods of both developing and delivering therapeutic activities for older people, but also evaluating their effects. And it will be important to understand the accessibility and uptake and potential effects of online and digital resources going forward, both because older people and those with conditions like Parkinson's may be unable to resume and rejoin in-person group activities for some time, which is still obviously an unknown, but also because the landscape of provision is likely to change in the longer term in response to this, as more older people become familiar or comfortable with digital methods as well, and as these can enable more widespread access to activities. So going back to the original research questions, the important issues to think about currently are whether digital dance classes can produce similar benefits to in-person programs and engage the same processes in terms of action observation, motor imagery and sensory motor outcomes relating to motor simulation. And if digital classes are found to be effective, can we develop more specialised home-based training with a greater focus on motor simulation processes, for example? And in terms of the social element, is this something that's critical to positive outcomes of dance? So, for example, we know from other areas of research that live action observation can have stronger effects on the motor system and movement than video-based observation. And without the same social element, can this still be a sustainable long-term approach to well-being? And just as a final point, I've learned that it's really important that research into creative activities involves mixed methods, so both quantitative and qualitative. And in order to be meaningful and useful, it should be interdisciplinary and user-informed and involve those people who the outcomes affect. So that's all I'm going to say, apart from just to say thank you on the final slide to the people involved in the work that I've discussed this morning, and of course to the participants in all our studies and our collaborators. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to questions later.
Thanks so much, Jude. Some really beautiful portraits there. I really enjoyed seeing those. So I'd like to invite Julie McCarthy now from Greater Manchester Combined Authority to discuss Beyond Volunteering and Towards Cultural Activism.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so I'm taking a rather different approach. So thinking about the social and economic imperatives for an age-friendly cultural offer. I'm not in a research post, so it's more of a kind of strategic and practice post. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. So in 2015, there were about 907,000 people aged over 50 in Greater Manchester. And in 20 years from now, that's going to be 1.1 million people who will be over 50. So that's 37% of our city region population. So we're not talking about a small segment of the population. And as most of you will probably already know, in terms of age-friendly working in Greater Manchester, our goals are to ensure social inclusion in later life, with an emphasis on co-design with older people, improving the quality of later life, and that includes economic participation. Within this endeavour, the arts, culture, creativity are much more than nice to have. There are social and economic imperatives for developing and promoting an age-friendly cultural offer, and that's what I'm going to explore. When we are thinking about older people and culture, the first images we might see in our minds is that of an older volunteer working front of house, taking a ticket at the theatre, or a music or dance session, maybe in a residential care home. Both great ways that older people benefit from engagement in a cultural offer, but both fairly passive in some ways, with older people helping out or receiving a service. So we're going to stop a minute and take a wider view. Economics are always compelling, particularly at the moment, so we'll start there. So can I have my next slide, please? Much has been written in the last couple of years about the longevity dividend, basically more older people having more disposable income, even if this is temporary, whilst the baby boomers are still booming. But the figures are quite astounding, as quoted in a report by the International Longevity Centre earlier this year. So just in 2018, older people in Greater Manchester spent about 3.5 billion on recreation, culture, restaurants and hotels, and that equates to nearly half of all spending by the city region's residents. Some of these same people, those in households who are 65 plus, are currently saving 1.8 billion each year that could be spent within the local economy. Now, particularly as we enter the recovery phase of COVID, there's an urgent need for the very broken cultural sector to attract this resource, the cash, by creating the right products and services for older consumers. Last night, you may have seen the news, the Royal Exchange, one of our flagship venues, announced it was starting a consultation process to make 65% of its permanent staff redundant. Now, this actually excludes their engagement team, the same team that leads their amazing age-friendly programme, including one of our Culture Champions projects, which I'll talk about in a second. Of course, this decision to exclude the engagement team is based on the fact that they can carry on this work, but they can't make ticket sales that they need to, so they can't run their performance programme. A lot of these tickets we're selling to our baby boomers with cash, so it's quite difficult at the moment to see how the longevity dividend can be unlocked for the cultural sector right now in a mutually beneficial relationship where older people who can pay for services and experiences they want that subsidise services and experiences for those who can't pay. So maybe we need to look a bit closer at co-production. So what is meaningful co-production? Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So the New Economics Foundation defines co-production as a relationship where professionals and citizens share power to plan and deliver support together, recognising that both partners have vital contributions to make in order to improve quality of life for people and communities. So co-production is something really, the conversation about co-production really started in health, but it is very prevalent across culture, but talked about in a very different way. So the difference between co-production and other forms of influence and participation is that in co-production, people with lived experience play an equal role in both designing and delivering services, rather than making suggestions that other people are responsible for deciding upon and implementing. So what does that mean for the cultural sector? Well, it doesn't mean lip service, it doesn't mean consultation, but it does mean risky practice, because results aren't guaranteed. If you want to guarantee results, then you need to control, dominate, and potentially manipulate the people that you're working with. So what's our best chance of success? If we go back to theories of power, so particularly those explored by postmodernism and feminism, so my favourite reference here would be Feminism, Postmodernism Development by Marianne Marchand and Jane Papard. There's three types of power, so well, four: power over, power to, about being able to act, power within, describing collective agency and action, and power within, which describes a sense of confidence, dignity and self-esteem that comes from gaining awareness of one's situation and realising the possibility of doing something about it. And power with and power within are the kinds of power I'm talking about here. Can I have the next slide, please? So why have I used activism? So because it's about people as agents of change rather than merely recipients of assistance. So that's what I mean by activism rather than volunteering. It's putting the means of production into the hands of older people, or rather letting them work this out for themselves by giving them all of the resources that they need to. The downside being you can't guarantee results, well, at least not artistic product results. But one of the great things about co-production is that when it's done well, it really plays to people's strengths, values their knowledge and experience, and in my opinion, good quality artistic outputs follow good quality process. So in Greater Manchester, the Culture and Ageing Well programme tries to do just that. From the 5 Culture Champions projects that we have to our LGBTQ project, Back in the Closet, we don't suppose older people are or want to be professional artists or that they just want to take part in the workshop. But we put all the means at their disposal so they can make and participate in the kind of creative and cultural experiences that they want. Have the next slide, please. So Culture Champions is one of Greater Manchester's flagship age-friendly programmes, currently operating across 5 districts. We expanded it up from the original Culture Champions project, which was initiated and run for a number of years by Manchester Museum and the Whitworth Art Gallery. So Culture Champions lead, programme and produce activity with and for their peers. They collaborate with and advise arts organisations, as well as organising their own events, festivals, training programmes. Now, they are an alliance of the willing who believe that participating in culture enriches lives and that it's time to raise the visibility of older people as consumers, makers and creative individuals. Now, they achieve this through cultural participation and activism and by making stuff. We work with a wide range of partners to make this happen, including housing providers, voluntary community organisations and, of course, arts and heritage organisations. An example of one of the programmes is Trafford Culture Champions, which is based in Stretford Town Hall, which was taken over a couple of years ago by a group of residents and is now a CIC. They've used the programme and the funding we were able to give them to engage with a more diverse range of older local residents who have taken part in a range of projects, but also learned production skills. And for example, restarted the Pink Purse, you've got a flyer on your screen for it there, an LGBTQ cabaret night, which was around in the 80s and 90s, but this time with a focus on performers and audiences over 50. I love this example because it confounds some of your more entrenched stereotypes about older people and culture. And I like to follow it with the fact that Debbie Harry, lead singer with Blondie, and still a punk and style icon, is 74 years old. So there are very few tea dances as part of Culture Champions projects. So originally, now I would be able to give you a wonderful table of outcomes, a summary of our external evaluation, but COVID has put paid to that, at least for now, until next March. But for now, the quote that I have up on screen, which, yeah, you can see. So I could have told you about The Weekender, a Greater Manchester cultural takeover by older people, featuring a TEDx where you had to be over 50 to speak, curated by older people for an intergenerational audience, but unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that either. And in fact, we decided to cancel it rather than reschedule it, and instead put in place a project called the Creative Care Kit. Can I have the next slide, please? So that's 46 pages of activities created and curated by culture champions, cultural organisations and others with and for older people with little or no digital access. So it's for older people who do not have digital equipment, internet access due to cost, don't know how to get online, and we have other initiatives working on that, on the digital divide. But this is an immediate response. This was an immediate response to COVID for older people who wanted to do something while they were at home, but couldn't get online. But as well as giving people something to do while spending more time at home, or more time alone at home, the kits also reinforce the message that recipients are not on their own, creating a sense of connection at a time when they are not able to rely on face-to-face interactions with family, friends and support networks. It's literally at the printers and being assembled next week, so I can't show you what's inside yet. I'm going, after this, I'm hot-footing it to take a delivery of about 400 pallets of stuff. But here's the next to the image, there's a version of what we created for young people about a month ago, which has gone out to 22,000 young people. Can I have the next slide, please? So Boulder is one area where we are working with older people as professional artists, and the programme responds to a lack of professional development opportunities for older artists nationally, internationally, and a recognised need to increase the visibility of older artists. And this is where the programme has moved from co-production to really production by older people. A GM-wide call-out and judging process whittled 80 or so artists looking for professional career development down to 10, roughly one for each borough. Now, they're about to come to the end of the first phase of the programme. They're working with Castlefield Gallery, a professional gallery in Manchester. Many of the participants selected after an open call have come back to their practice or become professionals in their practice after having made quite difficult choices early in their lives. One example is a man whose parents wouldn't let him go to art school because he needed to get a proper job. So he ended up being laying roads for a living until he got redundancy and was able to go back to college and do an art degree. So the Boulder programme is a really great example of older artists taking control. They'd originally planned a show as part of the Weekender that I mentioned before. Then the group began discussing that horrific rhetoric in the press about older people being cold, the scandal of infection in care homes, and decided to repurpose their exhibition as an intergenerational discussion on those themes. And the show is now going to be part of the main exhibition programme at Castleville Gallery, hopefully before Christmas, if it's safe to do so. So Greater Manchester is the UK's first city region to have made the arts and culture integral to its health strategy. Much of this field of work is driven by a need to improve health outcomes and indeed by health money, but that's where the partnership comes in. So the Combined Authority is championing culture's role in improving health and wellbeing in our culture strategy, as well as through health and social care. So this is a pincer movement, and we're lucky and unique to have those conditions in Greater Manchester. We're well positioned as a laboratory to test new approaches to place shaping, public service delivery, civic engagement and creative health. And another couple of examples of what we're doing. So for example, we're working with the LGBT Foundation on Back in the Closet, a programme of artist residencies in retirement settings in partnership with 5 housing associations to explore how retirement schemes can be more inclusive. And this came off the back of some research that was published by Stonewall and by the University of Manchester and the University of Nottingham around the lack of LGBT awareness and inclusivity in retirement settings. So we've been working with older people, older artists and the housing associations to find ways to tackle this. We'll publish the results of the, it's a action research project really, and we're going to disseminate it to the housing sector. We're also working with the Greater Manchester Older People's Network about to relaunch a photography competition to challenge the perceptions of the experiences of older people during the pandemic, challenging some of the horrific ageism that has sort of grown and re-emerged. But just like all good co-production, it's taking time because we can't agree on a name for the project. So once we have, we're going to launch it. Our evaluation and our research, I'm sure, will make a compelling case, but it's not all about health outcomes and the longevity dividend. Can I have my last slide, please? The production of new art and cultural experiences by older people and for older people is a good and necessary, and I think potentially radical endeavour in itself. Ian McKellen has just been announced to be playing Hamlet at the age of 83 in a live performance, and I can't wait to see it, to see how they challenge some of the perceptions of age and creativity. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. That was really, really interesting. I'd like to invite our final presenters now, Kat Algoscaife and Sarah Lord, to talk about the Cartrevi programme. Oh, and just a reminder, if you have any questions for any of the presenters, please feel free to put them in the questions box and we'll answer some of these after our little break in a bit. Thanks, Kat and Sarah. Kat, you're muted.
There's always one, isn't there? Sorry. Okay, so well, thank you very much for joining us today. Myself and Sarah are going to be talking about the Cartrevi programme. It's an arts in care homes programme that's been that is delivered by Age Cymru, and I have been involved as the research partner from the beginning in 2015. Oh, my slides aren't, there we go. So before you hear a bit more about the programme itself, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the progression of the evaluation over the years. So anyone who's heard me talk, present at conferences before in the last 4 years will probably have heard me talking about Cartrevi. I completed a large-scale evaluation in 2017 and launched it in the Senedd, which is Welsh Government too. So based on those results, the programme gained further funding for an additional 2 phases, meaning that by the end, the funders will have provided 6 years of funding, which is incredible. But it also means they're unlikely to be able to fund it any further and offer long-term funding. So we then had to sort of think a bit more strategically about what evidence might be needed to help make the case for Cartrevi to become embedded within the social care sector and become sustainable. And one way that we thought about doing this was through a social return on investment. We had a huge database data set from the first evaluation that we'd only scratched the surface of really for the evaluation report. And so we thought that we could use this to do a retrospective social return on investment. And this would really add to the evidence and provide additional evidence on the social value generated by the programme. So kind of moving from everyone really benefited to showing some of the economic cases as well, to try and demonstrate that value to commissioners and new investors, to try and help enable resource allocation decisions. We also did some stakeholder interviews and some desk research looking at the models, which fed into the development of phase 3, which Sarah is going to talk about in a bit after me. So I'm actually going to be quiet now and show an animation that myself and Sarah, along with Kelly from Age Cymru and Savage and Grey Design, have developed that will talk a bit more about the programme and reveal the results from the SROI. So this is actually an official launch of this animation because we weren't able to do it in the way that we had planned. So all being well, I'm going to show the animation just to say that it may pop up into a new window, so you might need to just click on it. Okay.
It's estimated that 80% of people in a care home are living with dementia. In 2013, the Alzheimer's Society surveyed relatives of care home residents, and it was found that less than half felt that their family member was being offered opportunities for activities. In April 2015, the Cartrevi programme was developed by Age Cymru. The purpose of the programme was to increase opportunities for residents and staff to participate in the arts, and to develop and mentor artists to deliver sessions for older people in care settings. Age Cymru recruited professional artists in Wales, who were then supported by experienced mentors, delivering weekly participatory creative sessions with residents, staff and family members over 8 to 12 weeks, inspiring and reigniting a passion for creativity. The first phase of the project ran between 2015 and 2017. Phase 2 between 2017 and 2019, with the current phase running from September 2019 to the end of August 2021. 3,217 residential and nursing care home residents, staff, volunteers and family members in 194 care homes have participated since the beginning of the programme. An independent evaluation of the first phase by Dementia Services Development Centre Wales at Bangor University found that the programme had a significant impact on older people's well-being, as well as staff attitudes towards residents, especially those living with dementia. Staff gained the confidence to lead creative activities themselves and were more likely to seek out cultural experiences outside of work. While this evaluation provided strong evidence of the impact of Cartrefi, it was felt that an SROI analysis would provide further evidence on the social value generated. An SROI analysis collects information to tell the story of how change is being created by measuring social, environmental and economic outcomes and uses monetary values to represent them. From this analysis, it was discovered that Cartrefi delivers a social value of between £4.53 and £9.08 for every pound of investment. Based on rigorous evaluation and assumptions based on previous research, the estimated social return on investment is £6.48 for every pound invested during the first 2 years. The legacy of Cartrefi in the care homes goes beyond an increased appreciation of the arts and into fundamental elements of person-centred care. Staff spoke about how the sessions had improved their relationships with residents. Cartrefi has also influenced artists' own practice and resulted in several short films, sound recordings, and touring visual art exhibitions. Overall, the Cartrefi programme has very real social value and continues to have a positive impact on the social care sector. The Cartrefi programme is delivered by Age Cymru and funded by the Bearing Foundation and the Arts Council of Wales. The independent evaluation was led by Dementia Services Development Centre Wales, Bangor University, and supported by the Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research.
So that was the premiere of the animation. It isn't available online yet, but we will be sharing the links once it is. We're just finalising the Welsh versions. So just very quickly, moving forwards, as hopefully you've just seen in the animation, the continued research partnership has already gathered quite strong evidence, but we need to be moving forwards with it to think about how the Cartrefi approach can be embedded within the social care sector. So building on the work that we started in the phase 2 evaluation, we have gained funding from KES for a master's project, which is a partnership between Bangor University and Age Cymru. And we're going to be using social care innovation labs, which is a method developed by Dr. Diane Seddon and colleagues. And essentially it's a connecting hub of people from diverse backgrounds working together because of their shared interest in creating transformative environments, developing collaborations and stimulating innovation to make positive difference for people connected to social care. Now, as you can imagine, the current situation has delayed this. So we have delayed the start of the master's project, but we're due to begin in August. But we really need to do some more thinking about how we can create the right dynamic for these social care innovation labs now that we're doing them virtually. But once we've figured that out and the project has happened, we're hoping that the research findings and recommendations will help Age Cymru to identify ways of embedding the Cartrefi approach within the social care sector as a way of meeting wellbeing needs of care home residents and supporting staff to implement the approach themselves. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk a bit about phase 3 and the effects that COVID-19's had on the project.
Thanks, Kat. So I'm Sarah and I run the Cartography project at Age Cymru. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please, Kat. So first of all, I'm just going to talk about the impact that COVID has had on our team of artists who the majority of them are freelancers. So of course they've had to search for means of financial support because obviously the project has had to be put on hold at the moment, and also of course arts venues and the care homes have closed their doors. Some of them have had to find work outside of the art sector as well, which is a real shame. But we're hoping now to start taking the project online, which will mean that at least then the team can get back to working on Cartography, which will be great. Until, of course, we can start delivering in person again. Can I have the next slide, please, Kat? So during this time, we have been developing a fortnightly e-newsletter, which has been going out to our care home network across Wales. So these newsletters are designed to share Cartography artist suggestions for creative sessions within care homes. And also signposting care homes to the wonderful free online creative and cultural resources and events that are taking place as well, just as a means of support for the care homes while we can't be with them. Can I get the next slide, please, Kat? So one of the parts of phase 3 of the project is our care home activity plans. So these are private sessions where our artists work with the care home over 4 weeks to build a sustainable activity plan for the home. These have had to be postponed midway through delivery, but we plan to start delivering these sessions online again, which will be great. And because of this, we do hope that we're going to be able to deliver the full 50 of these by the end of the project next year. Can I have the next slide as well, please? Another part of phase 3 is our care home workshops, where we bring homes together. They're normally regionally, and they're interactive workshops to build staff confidence to be able to lead creative sessions themselves within their care home. So again, because of COVID-19, months of these planned workshops have had to be cancelled. But again, we're planning on starting to deliver these online, which the positive parts of these is more rural care homes who have had trouble engaging in the workshops before because of distance to other care homes. They'll be able to join because of course travel won't be an issue. And we do encourage in these sessions for care homes to actually communicate with each other and share and support each other through networks. So we're hoping this will mean a wider support network as well for care homes. Next slide, please, Kat. Then we have our artist workshops, where these are all designed to build capacity for sustainability of the Cartography project. So artists and creatives across Wales with an interest in working within the care sector can join the workshop, join the workshops where we share, our artists share the knowledge and experience that they've gained from working in care homes since the beginning of the project. So again, months of these workshops have been cancelled. So again, we're going to take these workshops online very soon, which means there'll be no geographical spread. So any artists from anywhere will be able to join these sessions. And it also means that whereas our Cartography artists would normally have only worked with artists within the same region as them, it means that any of them can work together, which of course will have a wider knowledge and shared experience then as well. So that'll be fantastic. And if I can have the next slide as well, please, Kat. So another part of Cartrevi is raising awareness of the creativity in care homes, and we do this by using our purpose-built exhibition space called the Cartrevi Cube, which tours around Wales. The tour, of course, is postponed at the moment. We have been posting virtual tours of previous exhibitions on our Cartrevi social media, but we do hope that, of course, that we'll be able to resume the tour soon. All the work within that's exhibited in the cube is made with or in response with residents, or our artist response to working with residents within care homes. And if we can have the final slide, please, Kat. So during the first phase of the project, our Cartrevi artists developed a Cartrevi activity pack, and following the success of this, where it's been used by care homes and health boards across Wales, we're looking to use this downtime now to develop a second pack. We want the focus of this to be on inclusivity, using the knowledge and the experience of our team of artists from the past 4.5 years, how they've worked so closely, particularly now during phase 3, with care home workers, and they know obviously what the care home workers would like to be able to deliver to residents, the time constraints they come up against, and what they find difficult to deliver. And also, in line with our normal practice, we want these to all be adaptable, so that every resident can become involved in the sessions, whether they're living with dementia, visual impairments, hearing loss, loss of mobility or motor skills. And also we want them to be adaptable, so they'll be able to be used for group sessions or one-to-one sessions, which of course, in line with COVID-19 at the moment, this is really important. But we also know that care home workers, activity coordinators, etc., do struggle sometimes to obviously deliver on a one-to-one basis for those residents who are unable to or don't want to leave their rooms. So that's it from me. Thanks.
Hello everyone, hope you've managed to grab a cup of coffee, had a comfort break. I just wanted to say thank you so much for all your questions that are popping into the question box. Robin is behind the scenes rapidly trying to collate those. Thank you also to everyone who's on Twitter and has been tweeting. Please do continue to do so. We've had 15 new followers since we started this morning, so thank you. And if you're not on Twitter yet, get on, and you can find all details of everything to do with us.
So we've had some really wonderful questions, and I'm gonna start by doing the more sort of specific questions for presenters, and then we've also had a few sort of more general questions which will hopefully lead to a nice discussion between you all. So the first question that we've got is from George Collett, who says, this is a question for Emma Harding, and wondering if you could explain how to analyse the creative methods, in particular the drawing graph style method.
Thank you for the question. And it's interesting actually to describe it as a drawing graph, because that's something we really grappled with in terms of how we describe it. So we thought, you know, are we wanting to ask people to draw their own graphs, or are we asking more for an image? So it's interesting that they have started to come out in that way, even without us kind of framing them like that. And to start with, we've been asking people in the pilot round a few questions about their drawings afterwards, to ask them to explain particular parts of the lines, what we're seeing in the lines. One of the things we're particularly interested in is the time period that the line captures. So often we've seen, if people talk about the first symptom to the diagnosis, often the bits of the experience that were particularly challenging, or where there was a lot happening, they may take up more of the space in the drawing than other periods in which not very much was happening. So we will do some qualitative analysis on the responses that people make verbally, but obviously a big drive for developing this method is for us to be able to capture the experiences of people who can't contribute in that way necessarily. So where we can, we'll be matching up individuals' drawings with other data, including kind of demographic data or more objective data about their diagnostic journey, so that we can draw some connections between how they're representing their journey and some of the other data that we have. At this stage, though, we're really kind of piloting the accessibility of the method. So a lot of the questions we're asking and what we're trying to tap into at the moment is how much do those questions make sense to people when we ask them? How appropriate does it feel to draw a line to capture experience? Yeah, so at the moment, very much trying to kind of assess the feasibility of it as a method, really, but can already see in some of the shared reflections and some of that kind of data triangulation that there will be some interesting findings in terms of the content and what those lines are trying to say as well. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Emma. Okay, so the second question is a question for Julie from Jan Ford at Orchestras Live. And she says, such a forward-thinking programme, do you think other combined authorities could or should be adopting this approach? And if so, what are the preconditions and evidence needed for this approach?
Can I just say yes? Thanks for the question. Yes, I think the precondition is a willingness and an ability to partnership work. So in Greater Manchester, we have Health and Social Care Partnership and the Combined Authority, which are they are separate but notionally under the same umbrella and coming closer together all the time. It's not an easy process, and we have a Great Place programme funded by Arts Council and Heritage Lottery, and the main outcome for that programme of work is better partnership working, demonstrating and encouraging the conditions, creating the conditions for arts and culture to be recognised and to be delivering on different strategy areas across the Combined Authority. So this isn't something that's happened overnight, and it was happening. The work on this was happening long before I arrived. I think having a cultural strategy that really talks to this agenda, having a health and social care partnership that basically we're not knocking on their door asking for money for arts and culture. It's about the very first conversation is how can we work together? What is it that we've got that's going to make your lives easier, and vice versa. And then having something which is really difficult at the moment, having some seed money to be able to experiment. So to be able to take, I think risk is really important. So to be able to take those risks without anyone feeling they're putting themselves on the line. So I think those are so it's a strategy, relationships, time, and a little bit of money. It doesn't need to be a lot, but a little bit of money, and someone to drive it from both sides. There's no point cultural sector driving this. It's got to come from both sides. That's really important.
Thanks so much, Julie. Okay, so we now have a question for Jude from Asa Johnson, who says, great webinar, thank you. With regards to dance, I work for a large care home provider. Whilst many of our homes have local creative visits to lead sessions, are there any organisations that you would recommend who could offer training to our staff on a national level? I think you're muted, Jude. You're muted.
Nice. Oh, thank you. Someone had muted me apparently. I didn't realise. Yeah, so obviously my expertise is more on the research side rather than the practice. So I wouldn't like to make any specific recommendations, but there are lots of organisations that are offering dance programmes, both in terms of professional dance organisations like, as I mentioned, the Royal Academy of Dance, who do programmes across the country and around the world. But also, I believe that there are some programmes being run in partnership with Age UK, Parkinson's UK, So it's something I'd have to have a look and get back to you on that. But if there's some way that I can feedback on that, then I'm happy to do so. If you want to leave your contact details, I need to email you maybe.
Yeah, I'm sure we can find a way to get those details to you, Jude. So we've got a few questions about Cartrevi that I'll ask Kat and Sarah to answer. So a couple of these will be yes/no answers, and then there are some more sort of detailed things. So Sarah Kemp wants to know, can artists from beyond Wales join the Cartrevi online training?
It is mainly at the moment just aimed at artists in Wales, because of course we're looking at sustainability of the project, and the project is only based in Wales at the moment, but it's possibly something that we could look into, but I don't particularly have a yes or no answer to that at the moment, but I would be more inclined to go towards the no, just because obviously it is just based in Wales at the moment, I'm afraid.
Could I just add that that will be part of the evaluation, I think. It's really important to consider that actually being forced online might be one of the ways of making it become more sustainable.
And we've got a couple of questions from Helena Bull, who says, how will the remaining Cartrevi sessions be moved online and delivered remotely? And then also, how were you able to bring carers and activity staff together for group sessions in the Cartrevi project? Was this coordinated with individual homes or management?
I missed the first question, sorry. I think that, I'll come back to that now, but the second question, we have an application process for Cartrevi, so care homes across Wales can apply to be part of it, and then the workshops, activity plans and stuff that were taking place in person before, I would contact them regionally to invite them to come along. Care homes, I would ask to host a session as well for a care home workshop, so then the other care homes in that area would be invited to come along to that. So it would all just be through the care home network who have applied for that phase. Can you repeat the first question if possible, please?
Yes, sorry. It's how will the remaining Cartrevi sessions be moved online and delivered remotely?
Okay, so I'm in the process of organising all of that at the moment, but we are activity plans, because the artists normally work one-to-one with the care homes on those, they will be set up. I'll be arranging them, but then they'll be delivered partly online, partly by phone if the care home prefer that with the artist, and then the artist will actually send a plan out to them, whether that's by post or by email, whatever that they would prefer, so we can deliver that exactly as we'd like to. And then the workshops, both the care home workshops and the artist workshops that will be taking place, we're going to hopefully be delivering those over Zoom. We want to try and keep them exactly the same as they were before, even though that they're not face to face. So we will send out a list of materials that perhaps that they can gather before the meeting. So they'll still be interactive. People will be making what the artist is making. They'll learn exactly how to do these things, and there'll still be time for questions from those people attending. So hopefully it'll run exactly how it was before, just not on a face-to-face, and we'll just try and keep the numbers small so there's plenty of time for interaction then.
Thanks, Sarah. So we've got a couple more questions for Emma and Emily, and then we've got a couple of more general questions that it'd be really great for our panel to feed into. So the first question is from Elizabeth Barry, who says, I wondered if Emma or Emily could say a little bit more about the research poetry activity Emma mentioned, as I'm working a bit in this area.
Definitely. So we're working with a poet, and just to draw on what other people have said about the benefit of that kind of interdisciplinary working, I'm very quick to put my hands up and say I'm not the poet or a poet in any form. So we're working with a poet, and we have 3 different ways that people can be involved in the research poetry at the moment. There's lots of face-to-face group delivery that was planned that has had to be adapted, obviously, but it hopefully is quite inclusive for people whichever stage of their condition they're at. So people can either submit a whole line or a phrase or a sentence to respond to a certain question, or there's a mini poem version we do, which means people just need to contribute a few words, and those are then organised in pairs by partners, and then all of the input is collated by the poet at the end, and what's returned to the participants is their original contribution. So everyone that was in their group, whether that was an electronic group and they didn't meet those people, or whether it was a physical face-to-face group that they were part of. And then the poet will include the finalised poem and also some explanation of his process, so how he change those words into the final poet. And then we're asking people, again, as with the other creative methods, because they're quite new to us especially, to feedback on what that was like, both making the poem and then receiving and reading and processing the poem afterwards, in terms of how their experiences were captured. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question. That's how we're progressing with the research poetry.
Fab. And then a question for Emily Brotherhood from Helen Vincent Tibke. Sorry if I've got that pronunciation wrong. So she says, I was interested to hear of your work around measuring the biosignals of people listening to familiar and unfamiliar music. One of the USPs of singing for the brain is the encouragement to learn new songs. Are you aware of any research in this particular area?
Well, thank you very much, Helen, for the question. So there is research going on, as I said, with in looking at familiar and unfamiliar music, and that's not to say that looking at unfamiliar music is any lesser than familiar. And I know a lot of people look at practice in terms of reminiscence therapy and rooting people into things that they know well. But I think we can all remember fondly times where we've discovered new music or new bands or artists that we've enjoyed, and that feeling is just as powerful. And so the individualized aspect, there's definitely theories around that. So from Linda Gerdner and others, and as I mentioned before, there's work going on at UCL in the Psychology and Language Sciences department, for example. In terms of learning new songs and the biosignals for people with rarer dementia, as by nature, the sample sizes are quite small and quite hard to recruit. We haven't looked into it yet in terms of our research group, but it's definitely something that I'm interested in.
Great, thanks, Emily. So I've got a couple of questions which are sort of more broad, which I will welcome any input from anyone on the panel. So if you just give me a wave if you want to speak, and then go ahead. So this is a question from Geraldine Montgomery, who's from the Leeds Arts Health Wellbeing Network. And she asks, she says she's interested in how we can embed co-production and how we can use alternative evaluation methods beyond self-report approaches in smaller community settings. So if anyone wants to jump in on that question. Go ahead, Julie.
In terms of embedding co-production, I think it's just a question of just doing it, to making a decision. It's quite a political act, I think, to say you're going to co-produce, but to do it, and to do it properly, and to take your time to do it. I keep saying the word risk all the time, but to take, and it is a risk, to hand things over, but not just dump it on their laps, but to go through a process of finding the people who want to be involved in this, and then working with them so they get to the point where they are able to make the decisions and do the work for themselves, bringing in, if they want to bring in a professional artist, they want to bring in an organisation, but that they feel they have the power to make those decisions and take those decisions for themselves. I think it's possible to co-produce research methods. So I used to work on a programme in Latin America where we did just that, and we worked with like 30 organisations to create a training package around arts-based community development methodologies, and then we created an evaluation package around that. I think you can work with an evaluator to co-produce an evaluation strategy and evaluation methods. There are other people on this panel that have probably got more expertise in that area, but I would say that part of co-production should be co-produced research.
Go ahead, Kat.
I just wanted to echo what Julie said. I think effective evaluation is done in sort of co-produced. It would be hard to say exactly what to do until you've had discussions with all the interested parties. And I totally agree that co-production in terms of the evaluation are really, really important. And including potential recipients in that process as well. So it's not just the organisations talking, that you're including those who are anticipated to receive the benefit as well.
Go ahead, Emily.
Can I jump in? Thank you. And to respond to this question, I think also perhaps elaborates a little bit on the question from Helen that I had before. This reminds me of in Created Out of Mind, which was a residency that we held at the Welcome a couple of years ago, which I know lots of you were involved in, and hopefully some of you maybe listening today were collaborators. But within that residency, there was a project called With All, which was partly, it involved dancers and musicians and psychologists and social sciences and people with rarer forms of dementia and their carers. And it was very much the aim of that was to create equality and parity in the kind of level of power and in producing those sessions. And they were completely improvisatory. And I think the improvisatory nature can really have a powerful impact on how much people with dementia and their carers may feel that they're impacting and contributing in the session as an equal player in the in that kind of research or community setting, regardless of whether or not kind of more formal evaluation is taking place.
Fantastic, thank you. Do you want to come through, Emma?
Yeah, if I could just add, just echo what everyone said really, and just to pick up on what Julie was saying about risk. I think we definitely felt with some of these novel methods that it's quite uncomfortable to start working in a way that you can't be sure how it's going to end up, or you don't feel you can already specify exactly where it's going to go or exactly what it's going to look like at the end. But I think that's got to be a fundamental part of, it really has been co-produced if you couldn't have said yourself at the start how it would have ended up. And I think something for us that's been really important is just documenting all of those changes and capturing the changes in the process that have happened as much as where we get to in the end, and shifting how we report on that in terms of, as Julie was saying before as well, thinking more about the process than what's coming out at the end, but really capturing that journey with whoever we're working with.
Thanks, Emma. So we've just got a couple more questions. This one is from Jill Rosano, and it's for Emily, Emma and Jude. And she asks, do you have feedback on the impact on the well-being of partners and carers of the participants? How the work helps to enhance relationships?
Yeah, if I could, just a small comment from me. We didn't actually, because we've just done a kind of small scale study so far, we've not specifically evaluated the impact on partners and carers, but we did have so partners of some of our participants either came along to the dance classes and joined in, or came along to dissemination events, and and you could see actually that they enjoyed not only participating but also seeing the positive impact on the individual, and actually one of our participants commented that members of her family had changed the way that they approached situations with her. So when they saw her struggling with something, instead of kind of jumping in to help, they kind of realized that actually she was capable of doing more than they thought, and that actually it was good for her to maintain her independence as much as she could. So sometimes it's about giving the partners or the carers some relief from the daily kind of being with that person and caring for that person all the time. But I think there's also an element of seeing the change in the individual, or seeing a new side to them that kind of influences the families or the carers' attitudes as well.
And just to add, oh sorry Emma.
You go.
Thank you. And just to add, for this particular project, we were looking solely at the individual with dementia, although we had a couple of carers as the healthy volunteers. So it would be interesting to have, perhaps there will be a subset of people for whom we have both, and see in the responses whether or not they reference each other, and perhaps shared music preferences or things that bring them together. So that's definitely something to look at, but perhaps for a smaller group within the wider sample who we collected the data from. I mean, thinking about how relationships change, I'm just thinking about a project that I wasn't personally involved in, but know well through Julian West from the Royal Academy of Music, called Music for Life, and there was Emma was very involved in capturing some of the data from that. So and that involved looking at the interaction between people bringing their relatives or friends with often later stages of dementia, and then seeing the impacts of that improvisatory music session that they were participating in, but not necessarily the relatives, and seeing that kind of that relationship change. So as I say, not work I've personally been involved in, but aware of going on.
And if I could just add to that, I think something that's quite key for us in the RDS impact study in particular is that we're trying to take as broad an approach as possible as when we think about who is affected by a diagnosis of a dementia. So, and with a lot of our participants have younger onset forms of dementia, so they may still have adult children living at home, they may still be looking after their own elderly parents. So we have a number of families involved in the study, and we'll be really keen, for example, with the Blue Roots drawing exercise, one of the plans to come back to how we may analyse that data, I think, will be to overlay different drawings from different family members about the same time periods and the same experiences, to try and take a whole kind of family system approach, to see how those different events are perceived and managed and negotiated within the whole family system. That's our intention, our plans anyway.
Great, thanks so much. So we just have one final question, which hopefully will bring a lot of our discussions this morning together. So Paul Kahn asks, how can busy practitioners and others stay in touch with your developing learning and experience? So I might hand over to Emily for this one. Emily Bradfield, sorry, too many Emilys.
Thanks ever so much, and thanks, Paul, for your question. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the symposium, we will be emailing all delegates with a link to our membership form. So if you're not already a member, if you can complete it, it's a very short SurveyMonkey form, and then you will be put onto our mailing list. And we usually do roughly quarterly updates, but when we have events we do more, so do keep an eye out on Twitter, and as I say, please do join as a member of the SIG so that you can keep informed of future events. We are planning an event to take place probably in the autumn that was due to take place during Creativity and Wellbeing Week, but of course had to be postponed. So we're just in the planning stages of that. So do watch this space for that, and that will be in collaboration with Flourishing Lives in London. So thank you ever so much to all of our presenters. Thank you so much to Robin for acting behind the scenes, and Karen, I don't know if you're hiding. Karen is behind the scenes. She's been moving forward everybody's slides. And yeah, once again, thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to everyone for joining us. We do hope you've enjoyed. Carry on the conversations on Twitter, and watch this space in your inbox for an email from me later with links to our membership form and our website. Oh, here's Karen. So we can all do a quick wave before we all go. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we do hope you've enjoyed.